Well, good morning, folks. Thanks for watching today. I wish I could tell you that I felt 100% better than I did on Tuesday, but it's like 10 to 20% better. So I feel a little bit better. I hope I sound a little bit better. I think I do. A little bit more energy today. We're looking down at a satellite image this morning, not at any current weather. This is a satellite image of Jamaica and then the island of Cuba to the north of that. This was before Melissa formed and then inevitably made landfall in Jamaica as the catastrophic Cat 5. Eric detailed those 185 sustained winds yesterday. Going to go down as a undoubtedly top 2, top 3 strongest hurricane of all time in the Atlantic, especially in terms of how strong it was at landfall. And the scale of the destruction in Jamaica and Cuba is only just now kind of coming to light as connection gets back on there. And now the kind of humanitarian relief side of things and the cleanup and the pickup and the rescue is underway. And we're hoping the best for them. But looking at this image on satellite, you can see before Melissa came through that kind of deep blue ocean water that we'd expect in the Caribbean. Now, this water was very, very warm. That was our concern as Melissa started to form, that it was going to tap into this high energy source for hurricanes. And if I jump over, I'm going to show you the next satellite imagery that shows after Hurricane Melissa passed the Caribbean. And in this image, Melissa's kind of just to the northeast of Cuba here after making landfall. And if you look at that deep blue Caribbean Ocean water, it looks quite a bit different slide to slide here. And what happened was Melissa came over here, formed, it ended up, as it grew in strength, it upwelled the ocean water. And we talk about this a lot. The hurricanes are like engines, like heat engines. They consume the heat energy from the ocean surface, they convert it into rainfall and updrafts, and then they move and distribute that about the earth. And what they do when they mix up the waters like that, you bring high wind, you put rainfall on it, you cool it off, but you also upwell cooler water from below. And so you get this kind of disturbed look to it, to the ocean surface. And you're seeing that here southwest of Jamaica. Now, if you look closely, you can even see some of the rivers have started to kind of pour out into the ocean off the coast of Jamaica here, giving that kind of like green hue to it. And this is not uncommon after major hurricanes, but it is indicative of the power here. It literally changed the ocean surface as it went over it. We saw something similar with Hurricane Ian, which impacted Florida in recent years. Again, the upwelled water to the west, and then these kind of like that brown murky water you see there off the Everglades and further north near Tampa. That is the rivers draining all that freshwater flooding from the rainfall out to sea. And always kind of, it's neat to see it, but it does show you the sense of the scale of these storms. This morning, where is Melissa? Fortunately, at this point, besides Bermuda, this little island here, it is no longer a major concern for folks in the Caribbean. So it's on its way toward the northeast after passing through the Bahamas, Cuba yesterday and the day before. If we look on satellite here, it does have still some convection trying to wrap around the eye wall. I believe it's a Category 2 here this morning, so weakened quite a bit from that record-breaking status that it had earlier. And it's on its way very quickly toward the northeast. You can kind of see it. See those high clouds getting stretched toward the northeast here, indicative that the jet stream's starting to pull this storm away pretty quickly here. And that was, we kind of thanked that trough moving through the southeast. I'm going to show you that Halloween forecast in a minute, and it's still cool. If anything, it's gotten a little bit cooler, unfortunately, for the Gulf Coast. But it's that trough that's now tugging Melissa, pulling it toward the northeast off into the North Atlantic. You can see that National Hurricane Center forecast here, where it just brushes up against Canadian Maritimes before heading east, perhaps near Iceland or the British Isles. But you do see Bermuda here with that red outline. Those are hurricane warnings here for Bermuda. So it's not going to be impacted by the center of the system, but it's on that right flank. And you can see how quick it's moving. I mean, these little dots, 2 a.m. Friday, 2 p.m. Friday, and this is about 5 a.m. Thursday here this morning. So how fast it's moving is going to increase the winds on the right flank of the storm, increasing those winds for Bermuda, where this will still be a hurricane. Still going to pack a punch for that island. A little bit closer to home, if we look at the radar mosaic this morning, you can see the showers across the mid-Atlantic today, even getting into like Ohio, West Virginia, up through Maryland, D.C. area. This is the low pressure system. Again, responsible for this is that trough that's moving through, that's starting to pull Melissa kind of out of our periphery here, but bringing quite a bit of showers to this area here today. Those will continue. The kind of maybe even bigger story to this is the cold air coming in on the backside. So if I jump back and show you that same field where we saw Melissa's wind field, well, we can identify here's this diffuse low over the Appalachians. Sometimes it's hard to define as it skips over the 4,000 foot range there. But what we can see is a high. There's a high pressure here. The wind's kind of emanating away from it. And that's helping to push this more Canadian air It's helping to push that Canadian air toward the southeast and bring that cold Halloween to so many folks tomorrow evening. If we look at the all hazards map from NOAA, let me pull this up a little bit. See dense fog advisories across Minnesota, western Wisconsin, portions of western Iowa. But south of that, freeze warnings in this indigo color across the southern plains here, even up into the central plains, Nebraska, portions of Kansas, Oklahoma, getting into West Texas here, all the way over into portions of New Mexico, the valleys there, and then southeastern Arizona. If we jump over and look at those current temperatures, I'm recording this just before 6 a.m. Central. So let's update those. You can see freezing observations all the way through West Texas, not widespread in Texas, but certainly in Kansas, certainly in western Oklahoma, much of Nebraska, and then just a few over here in New Mexico here this morning. Wisconsin, see, almost getting closer toward Madison now, down to freezing. Again, you get like north of here, you're talking well into the freezing season at this point, but you get further south, those freeze warnings posted for those areas, still kind of waiting on their first big freeze here, and we're certainly seeing it here this morning. If we look at those minimum temperatures here overnight here this morning, so just kind of accounting for what we have here, you can see the West Texas concern that we had with forecast for this morning down to 25 in Amarillo. I don't think we dropped quite that low at 30 now, and 32 all the way closer to like Abilene and Midland. Again, didn't maybe drop quite that far down. Amarillo, not quite that cold, now down to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit here this morning, again, just before 6 a.m. Central. Maybe some scattering of freezing obs further to the southeast, but largely a little bit warmer maybe than expected across West Texas, at least for this morning's forecast. Now, if I take this forecast into tomorrow, minimum temperatures overnight, you can see that cold weather shifting to the southeast all the way down to the Gulf coastline with 40s from West Florida into southwest Louisiana, even down through South Texas. So an impressively chilly evening tonight into tomorrow morning, and that will include tomorrow night as well. But notice that with respect to those freeze warnings, the freezing line is not following with it. The freezing line, I'm going to try to draw it here. It's always kind of tricky. Kind of lasso all the 32s or below that I can see. And so that might do it. So somewhere up here in Canada, the freezing line, fortunately, not being pulled down. So that's why you don't see those freeze warnings being populated further toward the southeast. If I take it even into like Friday evening into overnight Saturday morning, again, very chilly in this quarter, at least, relative to what you're used to feeling on a Halloween evening. Chilly, I think here across the Midwest as well, relative to average. But again, that freezing line, all right, here we go again. I'm going to try to lasso 32 and below. Maybe up here. Let's grab that one. And that might be the last one. So again, it's going to be something like that, where the freeze threat is staying off. It's just chilly toward the southeast, and that lingers through the weekend. Now on Sunday, temperatures warming up on the backside of this across the plains in the southwest. We talked about that ridge dominating in the west so often in the forecast here over the next 7 to 10 days. And then we get all the way out to Wednesday. The warm-up is on the way. And those, at least in the overnight temperatures, if I showed you the maximum ones, you'd see the creeping up as well. I do want to talk about this. We have quite a bit of momentum coming out of the Pacific jet stream. Eric mentioned the kind of cascading lows that we'd have to talk about coming through. A lot of this momentum, I can tell you right now and just kind of spoil it, is focused on the northern tier of the country. So while we have this deeper system coming through the southeast, cold weather associated with that, while this looks like a big party in terms of fall or winter-like weather, a lot of this is going to be focused here across British Columbia, and it's going to stay across the northern periphery of the country, and so will likely the system next week, which we'll take a look at in a second. I think I can best showcase this with the 500 millibar vorticity maps. What we're looking at here is spin in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That kind of highlights where these shortwave troughs are. So you can see one here, should be a slight weekend weather maker, and this much deeper one here. This is causing all those showers and pulling that cold air in beside it. And then here's Melissa as well. There's certainly spin in the mid-levels of the atmosphere above Melissa, and highlighting that here on the vorticity chart. I'm going to play this forecast forward. You can see this little shortwave spinning over the Midwest as we go through tomorrow. Maybe some showers, light showers associated with this, maybe some clouds. But you can see it's not nearly as strong as this previous system here now exiting out of New England tomorrow evening, and cold air settling in behind it. But it should be a pretty fair weather, but chilly evening across the Midwest and the Southeast. That next system has already come on shore very quickly in British Columbia, and now racing over this ridge here that's developing across the west. We see that next shortwave kind of lingering over the Midwest before it drops kind of out of the picture toward the southeast. And now that original momentum that was coming in like this when I started is here across Ontario, kind of, again, lining the northern periphery of the country here. I take this into Tuesday and Wednesday. Here's our next storm system. And we mentioned this one yesterday, the day before, being a little bit more potent for the Pacific Northwest because it's coming in a little bit further south than that one before it. So that first shortwave trough came in like that, impacting British Columbia there. This one can be more so Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. That comes onshore. But again, stays across the upper Midwest, then goes into Ontario. There is this other piece to it. Kind of sneaks through the Gulf Coast states, but this one in the recent model runs hasn't been as potent for rainfall next week there. And I think what we're seeing here, and I'll just play this back a little bit, with lows here, ridging here, generally troughs kind of moving through here. This is kind of your classic positive PNA, where we have troughs in the Gulf of Alaska, ridges across the west, and systems just kind of flow up and over and around them. And if we look at the PNA values over the next kind of 15 days here, very positive. This week makes sense with what we're seeing. We saw the heat advisories earlier in Southwest California this week, dropping a little bit closer to zero, but generally staying on the positive side as we go out through the forecast, even out to like the 13th and the 14th before some of these ensembles take it back toward average. And the result of that, if I show you the precip rather than just the 500 millibar vorticity, all right, let's take us through the next 24 hours that showers and storms start to sneak up toward the northeast into New England. This takes us in through Friday morning. Remember that second shortwave we talked about? Certainly weaker than this one, but still causing some showers and clouds here. This is now 7 p.m. Friday, so here's Halloween. Low here over Maine, rather deep, 978 low. Snow in the Adirondacks. Chilly, wet in New England, but largely clear across a wide area of the country. It's just going to be chilly in this area here, certainly clear and warm across the west. Those showers just kind of lingering overnight through the upper Midwest. Perhaps some, just light returns here, Texas through the weekend. It's that low. Remember, I kind of mentioned that trough just worked its way off the southeast. You can see some of those showers over the Appalachians. And then that system that's just running up and over, didn't really get a lot of definition as it went through Alberta. Maybe some snow on the backside of it here, but not like a huge precip maker as it comes through the provinces here. Eventually forms a low over the Hudson Bay. But again, doesn't have access to a lot of moisture with that first shortwave kind of kicking out some of that deeper Atlantic moisture. So a lot of that rainfall staying off near Ontario with some snow showers as well mixed in there, but largely missing much of the continental U.S. And then by Tuesday to Wednesday, that next deeper system, remember we talked about more so Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. Here it comes. Wednesday at noon, deep 972 low, plenty of flow up this way like we saw. And a wind maker, a rain maker moving in from the northwest. Not as much snow, unfortunately, with a little bit of those warmer conditions, likely due to that positive PNA. And then we do have another one of these upper Midwest lows moving through, likely near the end of next week, wrapping up into New England. Again, it's like common trajectory, right? We're going to start sounding like a broken record. We even have maybe another one here. Look at this low over Saskatchewan, then it moves through another kind of clipper-like low through the north. Now, where didn't we see a lot of precip in this forecast? Here across the southwest and here across the Midwest and the Gulf Coast states. Some of the earlier runs had a little coastal low kicking up here. I mentioned that on Tuesday. Not seeing it in this model run. It stays almost off the coast of Florida entirely, developing somewhere further to the south. So we just combine this up. Let's look at the 5-day precip anomalies. Here's that current system moving to the northeast, that more northward trajectory system cutting across. We take it out to 7 days. Not much of a difference, but we're starting to get into next week's system as it comes onshore, dry in the interior of the country. We take it forward to 10 days, and then ultimately the 10-day forecast. Plenty of rain for the Pacific Northwest, plenty of rain for New England, some across central Canada, but drier to the south of the Midwest, and now drier in the Gulf Coast, drier across the Southwest as well. Kind of aligning with our forecast that we kind of thought about for early November, a little bit earlier in October. Look at the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Warm across much of the interior. Again, with that jet stream staying to the north, we'd expect warmer conditions to the south. We're seeing that above average contours all the way to New Jersey. Now, I don't know if it'll exactly feel warm in these areas here with those cold fronts moving through, but it's certainly going to feel much warmer for the plains and some of these cold shots that we've had recently. And if we look over at precip, not a surprise to see that wide area of those drier than average contours showing up all the way out through the 6th to the 12th, given that this pattern that we're in. We do have that kind of coastal low lingering near Florida, but it doesn't look as wholesale wet for the southeast at this point. Eric touched on the long range yesterday. I don't have a lot more to add to that. I will say one thing I'm doing, rather than looking at the analogs right now, at least for like the end of November, early December, because I think we're in a bit of like that. We talked about the spring predictability window being a concern, but there's something of a fall predictability window as well. As you go through October into November, there's just so much momentum, and then we can kind of get stuck in a pattern more so in December and January. So it's kind of hard to parse out where we're going. I'm going to use a simple MJO forecast at this point because it served me pretty well going into the end of October and early November at this point. I just kind of mentioned that our forecast was kind of staying on trend for early November, what we thought about it, at least a week or two ago in October. And largely it just kind of came about from looking at the MJO. We had a lot of movement from the MJO that was rather predictable. You can see this transition from phase 2, 3, 4 into 5. Now, we've been talking about this potential transition into phase 6. I think that's still likely at this point. I'm going to jump back. Let's see if I can pull up ECMWF extended. That takes us all the way toward the end of November. And there's this general consensus that at some point we're going to be moving into phase 6, maybe phase 7. Now, there's some question to that. I said that's the consensus, but Eric mentioned yesterday that some of these phase transitions can get stuck on the maritime continent. What I mean by that is Indonesia. As they move west to east across that, quote-unquote continent, they sometimes don't track out into the Western Pacific. So they almost get caught in between like phases 5 and 6 before reverting to null space and popping out somewhere here in the Eastern Hemisphere. And, this has happened before. You can almost kind of see it in our October MJO phases. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. And that kind of failure to move all the way into the West Pacific is common in La Nina years. And we're in a La Nina right now. So there's some skepticism on if our easily telegraphed MJO forecast, whatever you want to call it, procedure, is going to work as well through the end of November. That speaks to some of the uncertainty that Eric mentioned yesterday. If we try to get a clue for that in the ECMWF weeklies, as far as the tracking the MJO with ascent, as we often do, which is what's contoured here in green versus brown. If we start out now, we can see a lot of that ascent over phases 5 and 6. That matches up with where we're at now, phase 5 going into phase 6. I'm going to take this 7-day velocity potential. I'm going to take it out into the future. And okay, we get out to like the end of November. I see, phase 7 here, maybe getting into phase 8. Certainly a lot of sinking in phase 2 and 3. So that kind of lines up. It's almost like the sinking area can tell you as much about where the MJO is positioned than anything else. As I take this into early December, start to see that sinking air, almost here across our typical area of focus for the MJO. And now I see ascent here across, closer to South America or Africa, which indicates me more of a phase 1. So transition all the way across every phase here. I mean, there's some chance of that we get all the way around. Look at some of these spaghetti models take us all the way around. And if that were to happen, that'd be kind of interesting because it doesn't always happen this time of year. If I take us out, like do phase 8, end of November, you can see us loading up a lot of cold air over Canada, the Hudson Bay. That could pose a threat for a very cold December. If I go to like phase 1 in early December, that could get a lot of flow into California as well after some of the cold air moves through. So, by the end of November, both of those scenarios, like phase 8, phase 1, would be interesting, but I have some skepticism here because, okay, here's a lot of flow, almost like subtropical flow coming to California. That would certainly be wet if we make that transition all the way around. But I mentioned that transition from, all the way 6, 7, 8 to 1, all the way through the West Pacific is unlikely in La Nina years because we have so much trade wind activity that kind of resists the movement of the MJO through the Pacific Basin. And it's that same reason that if you start looking at like phases 8 and 1, and some of these models here, you're going to see pretty wet California setups. And we don't typically see wet California setups with a La Nina. So again, this all kind of, it works together. I think there's enough here to be skeptical of that major transition. I think another, distinct possibility, I might put it at the more likely possibility, is we do see this stalling out in phase 5 and 6. And we kind of linger here maybe back into null space as we get toward December. Then in that situation, you're looking at, phase 6 as we get through the end of November. And that would just generally be kind of a little bit more of what we've seen here. So cold across the east, warmer across the west, and drier through the end of November. And that's not totally off base with where some of these long-range models are in the forecast right now. And it's certainly not off base with persistence, which is kind of the general pattern that we're in now anyway, which tends to win the day more often than you would think. So that's the kind of what I'm watching for here. If we'll get that MJO phase transition, I'm kind of skeptical of it right now for La Nina and a few other reasons. And that would mean more warmth on the way for the southwest. The western U.S., perhaps some more dryness in that interior corridor, as we've mentioned. Not the friendliest forecast for kind of a wet start to the year for California, despite what we saw in October. But it is what we'll be watching going forward. I'll leave it at that. The last thing I'll kind of mention is that at least looking at this phase 6, getting into like late November, early December, it does look pretty positive TNHE, which is another thing we're kind of watching for this year given the analog to last year. So another kind of feather in the cap for that scenario there. I'll leave it there today. I think that's my last slide. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll talk with you all next week with an improved voice. That's the goal.